On what seemed like an ordinary brisk morning in London, Heathrow Airport buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Early commuters rushed to gates, the aroma of over-roasted coffee drifted from kiosks, and public announcements echoed through the terminal. Passengers navigated the crowded concourse, unaware that a moment was about to unfold that would ripple through royal circles and the public alike. Among the crowd, it's mostly unnoticed, a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop outside Terminal 5. The car door opened quietly, revealing someone far from ordinary Princess Charlotte of Wales. At just 9 years old, she has grown up in the public eye, often seen at royal events with her parents, Prince William and Princess Catherine. But on this day, Charlotte wasn't wearing a designer coat or stepping onto a red carpet. Dressed in a plain navy jacket, dark jeans, and white sneakers, she looked like any other school-aged girl traveling with minimal fuss. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried just one small bag. There were no bodyguards flanking her visibly, no photographers trailing behind, only a child moving through the airport quietly, with confidence far beyond her years. But that normality, it seemed, led to an unfortunate misstep. As Charlotte entered the terminal unnoticed by the busy airport crowd, she stood momentarily uncertain. With a polite expression, she moved toward a service desk, seeking assistance for her scheduled travel. The staff, unaware of her identity and likely distracted by the flurry of morning activity, failed to recognize her. Instead of providing help, an employee reportedly questioned why a child was alone and seemingly unaccompanied. Protocols kicked in. Within minutes, she was gently but firmly escorted away from the terminal area, unaware of who she was dealing with. The staff acted out of standard security procedure, concerned about a minor traveling solo. But soon after, murmurs began to ripple through the airport staff. "That girl looked familiar," one reportedly whispered. Another noted her striking resemblance to the Princess of Wales. Whispers turned to concern, and confusion set in. It wasn't long before everything changed. In a second SUV, Prince William arrived not in a fury, but with a quiet intensity. His presence was unmistakable. He walked swiftly but calmly through the terminal, his expression serious yet composed. Staff members stood frozen as he approached the security counter. No shouting, no public spectacle, just a father coming to retrieve his daughter and demand answers. Witnesses say the atmosphere shifted the moment he appeared. Airport officials quickly pieced together the misunderstanding, their faces turning pale with realization. Apologies came in abundance. But the damage had been done. The royal family has not issued an official comment on the incident. But palace sources indicated that Prince William was understandably displeased, and that the situation is being reviewed to prevent future missteps. While no malice was intended, the episode serves as a stark reminder that even members of the royal family, particularly the younger generation, can be swept up in everyday chaos when the crown isn't shining visibly on their heads. For many, this event humanized the royals even more. Sight of Princess Charlotte alone, humble and unnoticed, stirred public empathy. It was a rare unscripted moment where royal life intersected with real-world unpredictability. And for those airport staff members, it was a day they won't soon forget. Despite the mishap, Prince William and Princess Catherine continued with their scheduled engagements later that week, including a heartfelt visit to Wales for St. David's Day. The royal couple greeted well-wishers, smiled for cameras, carried on with grace and composure, ever letting the earlier ordeal cast a public shadow. Still, behind the smiles and handshakes, one can't help but wonder what conversations occurred behind palace doors that night. Princess Charlotte may be young, but her presence and poisoned the face of an unsettling misunderstanding showed a glimpse of the royal strength she inherits. In a world where cameras usually follow every royal move, this incident was a rare reminder that the next generation of royals walks among us sometimes unnoticed, often unprotected, but always with dignity. In an age where royal life often feels carefully choreographed and protected behind palace walls, Princess Charlotte, the young daughter of Prince William and Princess Catherine, took a bold step into the ordinary world. But what started as a quiet journey quickly turned into something no one expected. It was a chilly morning at Heathrow Airport, and the usual crowds bustled through the terminal. Flights flashed across the departure boards, luggage rolled noisily along the floors, and weary travelers made their way through long queues. But amid the crowd was a young girl traveling alone, one who carried a royal title, but wore no crown. Princess Charlotte of Wales was on her way to Edinburgh to attend a children's charity event. Her parents had encouraged the trip as part of her early introduction to royal duties, but they had also insisted she experience this moment as any other young girl might, without pomp, without protection, and without an entourage. Today, normalcy was the goal. Dressed simply, and carrying only a small bag, Charlotte walked with quiet confidence. Yet as she stepped inside the crowded terminal alone, no security detail in sight, that carefully constructed normal began to unravel. Clutching her ticket, she approached the check-in counter, her nerves gently simmering beneath her calm exterior. Behind the desk stood Sarah, a young airline staffer several hours into a grueling shift. She barely glanced up when she called out, "Next, please." Charlotte stepped forward and slid her boarding pass across the counter. "Good morning," she said politely, her voice soft but assured. Sarah muttered a greeting and returned, her eyes glued to the screen. But as her fingers moved over the ticket, she suddenly froze. There, embossed at the top of the boarding pass, was a royal crest, subtle but unmistakable. She looked up, truly seeing Charlotte for the first time. Something was off. Charlotte looked like any other 9-year-old, sweet, polite, maybe a little nervous. But what child traveled alone with a crest like that on her ticket? "Is this your ticket?" Sarah asked, her tone stiff. "Yes," Charlotte nodded, her cheeks coloring slightly under the scrutiny. "Do you have any ID?" Charlotte hesitated. Her parents had always taught her humility, not to throw around her title, not to expect special treatment. But in this moment, silence wasn't an option. "No ID," she said softly. "But I am Princess Charlotte of Wales." The words hung in the air. Sarah blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Her fingers hovered over her radio. "At one moment," she said quickly, turning her back to Charlotte as she contacted a supervisor. The tension in the terminal shifted. What had started as a routine check-in had now drawn quiet attention. An older staff member appeared. More senior, more serious. He reviewed the ticket and studied Charlotte with careful eyes, his expression unreadable. "Do you have anyone we can contact?" he asked. Charlotte took a steady breath. "My father is Prince William. You can contact Kensington Palace for confirmation." It's a slight nod. He turned to the desk. "Verify it immediately." Charlotte stood still, holding her boarding pass tightly. She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. Beneath her calm was a storm of anxiety. This was supposed to be simple. Quiet flight. A moment of growing up. But now, she was being looked at like a fraud. Like a child pretending to be royalty. Minutes passed. Finally, the call came through, confirmed. The staff's demeanor changed instantly. Apologies were offered and reassurances made. A discreet escort was arranged to accompany Charlotte through security. The situation was under control, but the moment had left its mark. What this brief encounter revealed wasn't just a procedural hiccup. It was a glimpse into the delicate balancing act the royal family tries so hard to maintain. To raise children in the spotlight, while protecting their right to experience life like any other young person. For Charlotte, this was more than just a flight to Scotland. It was a lesson in grace, composure, the challenges that come with carrying a name known around the world. And though her identity had been questioned, her quiet dignity spoke volumes. Whispers began to ripple behind the counter. Another staff member, a man named Frank, joined the conversation, narrowing his eyes at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Sorry, miss," Sarah said eventually, her voice hesitant. "We'll need to verify your claim. It's just unusual for a minor to be traveling alone in business class." Charlotte blinked, stunned. Her ticket was legitimate. Her reason for flying was clear. But none of that seemed to matter, not if they didn't believe her. "My seat," she murmured, fighting back a swell of frustration. But Sarah was already typing. not looking up again. Charlotte remained there, alone, caught in a moment where her royal lineage meant absolutely nothing. Suspicion filled every glance. Minutes dragged on. No one offered reassurance, no one offered help, and still, no one realized who she was. The world bustled around her as if she didn't exist until someone silently motioned for her to be moved to a side room. But why? What invisible line had she crossed? What alarm had sounded behind those quiet exchanges? Stay with us because what happened next might leave you stunned. Charlotte stood still as Sarah turned back to her. The woman's face was unreadable, her voice void of warmth. "I'm afraid I'll have to escort you to a holding area," she said flatly. "We need to verify the payment for your seat." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Charlotte's pulse quickened. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It had shifted into something more serious. The air grew heavy, like a storm about to break. "My parents," she began, her voice trembling with disbelief. But Sarah wasn't listening. She'd already signaled to someone nearby. A man in a navy uniform approached. His stride was firm, his presence unmistakably authoritative. When he spoke, his voice left no room for argument. "Please, come with me." Charlotte scanned the busy terminal one last time as the world moved on around her. Travelers laughed, sipped coffee, juggled bags, completely unaware of the quiet drama unfolding nearby. No one recognized her. Not a single soul. To them, she was just another young girl in a coat. Stranded in the middle of an airport she should have passed through with ease. With dignity. With the quiet respect that comes with being royal. She thought of her parents. They had trusted her with this journey, told her it was important. That she was ready. That she represented more than just herself. But now, she was being led away not as a dignitary, not even as a passenger, but as a problem, an inconvenience. She followed the man in silence, her small frame barely making a sound against the tiled floor. Round her, adults moved with purpose, towering like monuments in a world that suddenly felt too big, too indifferent. She walked quietly, each step taking her further from certainty and deeper into a place that felt like nowhere. But she remembered her training. Grace under pressure. Composure in public. No crying. No scenes. Keep it together. Always. They arrived. At a side room, overhead lights buzzed faintly, flickering as if uncertain themselves. Space was sterile, stripped of warmth. When the door clicked shut behind her, it wasn't loud, but it carried a finality that echoed in her chest. Charlotte tightened her grip on her boarding pass. It felt like the only proof she belonged anywhere at all. Moments later, the door creaked. Open. A new staff member entered, older, with tired eyes and a faded name tag that read George. He glanced at her, then at the ticket in her hand. "I apologize for the delay," he said briskly. "But we can't process your boarding pass until it's been verified." The system flagged it for review. Charlotte's breath caught. Flagged, but my parents are expecting me in Edinburgh. They're waiting. George nodded, not unkindly, but his tone left no room for argument. "I understand, but without confirmation of payment, we can't allow you to board." Her jaw clenched. Well, tears. "Not here. Not now." George turned to another staffer nearby. "Call the number on file. Skip this sorted." Charlotte stood still, willing her breath to stay slow and steady even as panic crawled up her throat. She knew her parents couldn't be reached tied up in official engagements. Wasn't supposed to need help. This trip was meant to prove she was ready, capable, independent. But now felt like a punishment for simply trying. Time dragged on. The lights above buzzed like a warning. The air felt stale, unmoving. Muffled voices echoed from beyond the closed door. Reminders that the world was still in motion while she remained stuck in place. She glanced toward the desk. Frank shook, his head slowly. Sarah still wore that composed expression, but it was thinner. Like it might crack. Something had shifted. The air in the room changed, like the walls had just taken a breath. Then, George picked up the phone. His voice was low, clipped, urgent. Sarah's eyes flicked toward her screen. Her brow furrowed. One of the men leaned in and whispered something barely audible, but heavy. Whatever he said sent a ripple through the room, subtle but unmistakable. Charlotte didn't catch the words, but she felt the signal, and no one stopped it. Something had shifted. Charlotte could feel it in the room before it even happened. Then the door opened again. A new figure entered, this one different. His uniform was sharper, pristine. Every detail of his appearance spoke of authority. He didn't hesitate. He didn't glance around the room. His eyes locked directly on Charlotte, then turned to George. "We need to move quickly," he said flatly. Charlotte's breath caught. "Move? Where? Why now?" Her pulse pounded in her ears, her mind racing. Questions bubbled inside her, but before she could voice even one of them, everything changed. The door opened again. This time it wasn't another officer. It wasn't a supervisor or a gate manager. It was her father. But what stunned everyone wasn't just his act to rival it, was the reaction. The moment Prince William stepped into the room, the air shifted completely. The tension that had lingered suddenly froze into silence. He was calm, composed, and unmistakably royal. All eyes turned to him, as if the very air had forgotten how to move. Staff members along the wall fidgeted, backs straightening, whispers dying on their lips. Charlotte sat frozen in her seat, small hands clenched in her lap. Her boarding pass had finally been verified, but none of that erased how she'd been made to feel. Invisible, doubted, out of place. All because she wasn't surrounded by bodyguards or draped in royal protocol. But now her father was here. Not just as a parent. Not even just as the Prince of Wales. He entered as the future king. His presence consumed the room. He said nothing at first, but his eyes went straight to Charlotte. She looked up, her carefully held composure finally faltering. Relief flooded, her face quiet and powerful, and then his gaze turned sweeping across every staff member in the room. It was Sarah who reacted first. The same woman who had questioned Charlotte. Her expression shifted immediately, pale, tight. She stepped back as if trying to disappear. The weight of accountability had arrived, and it wore a navy suit and a crown in waiting. Finally spoke. His voice was calm, but underneath the restraint was steel. "Can someone explain," he asked slowly, "why my daughter was removed from the terminal?" His words were measured, deliberate, but each syllable landed like a stone. In still water, and no one answered right away, because in that moment, the only thing louder than his voice was their silence. Sarah began to stammer, the cracks in her professionalism showing as the weight of the moment pressed down. "Yeah, Your Royal Highness," she managed, her voice faltering. We didn't realize." There was confusion. Ticket was valid, of course. William didn't flinch. His tone grew firmer, more resolute. "She identified herself," he said. And yet she was questioned, doubted, removed, treated like a potential threat. "She's a 9-year-old child." Charlotte sat quietly, watching as her father stepped fully into his role, not just as a prince, but as a protective parent. Frank stepped forward now, clearly rattled. "Sir, we deeply regret the misunderstanding. We had no idea." William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried more weight than volume. "You had no idea because you didn't listen. Because you assumed. Saw a young girl traveling alone and decided she didn't belong." The silence that followed was heavier than any reprimand. Sarah's voice cracked as she tried again. "Your Highness, I'm truly sorry. I was just following protocol. We didn't mean any harm." "But harm was done," William replied, without missing a beat. "What you meant is irrelevant. You humiliated a member of the royal family, and more importantly, my child." The tension in the room peaked. Sarah's composure collapsed entirely. Her voice trembled, her eyes wide. Please accept my apology," she whispered. "We never meant to cause distress. We're begging for your understanding." William looked down at Charlotte, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" She gave a small nod. I'm fine now, Daddy. He turned back to the staff. Let's make sure this never happens again. Frank nodded quickly. Absolutely, sir. Measures will be taken immediately. The energy in the room shifted. Apologies came pouring out in awkward rushes. Staff scrambled to recover their posture and tone, now drenched in remorse. Charlotte's ticket was reprinted, this time with staff treating it like a sacred document. A manager offered her a voucher. Another nervously asked if she'd like to be escorted personally to her gate. William gave a curt nod. We'll handle it. And just like that, they turned to leave. Heads bowed in silence around the room. Staff who had only minutes earlier dismissed Charlotte now looked shaken, whispering quietly among themselves, already aware that this encounter would echo through Heathrow for days, if not longer. What began as a quiet misunderstanding had turned into a royal reckoning. And though Charlotte had spoken few words, her quiet dignity spoke volumes. Her father had defended her, but the lesson had been delivered by both of them as they exited the room. Charlotte cast one last glance over her shoulder. Behind her, the staff still stood frozen, some pale, others whispering nervously. Among themselves, she wondered, would they speak of this out of embarrassment? Or would it change something? Would they remember her not as a mistake, but as a mere reflecting something uncomfortable? But her thoughts were interrupted by the weight of the moment ahead, because what came next wasn't just her father's concern, was something deeper, a royal truth. A lesson wrapped in quiet strength. A father's powerful message to his daughter, Princess Charlotte. She walked beside Prince William, her small hand curled tightly around his. The private corridor felt quieter than the rest of the airport, its hush broken only by the soft rhythm of their steps. She moved with calm precision, far too composed for someone who'd just endured public humiliation. Her thoughts were a blur. The stairs, the questions, the cold room, and those fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead like insects. And now here she was next, to the future king. Not because of duty, not because of ceremony, but because everything had gone wrong. William glanced down. At her, his face was unreadable, but his hand around hers was firm and steady. You held yourself well today, he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight like it belonged in rooms where decisions shaped nations. Charlotte didn't answer right away. What could she say? Her father hadn't been there in the moment she needed him most. When strangers questioned who she was, when grown adults treated her like she didn't belong. I don't think they recognized me, she finally whispered. Barely louder than a breath, William exhaled, a soft sound that carried something like guilt. That's possible, he admitted, but that doesn't make it right. Charlotte looked up at him, startled. There was no polished royal language in his tone, no diplomacy, just truth. Do you think they treated me like that, 'cause I wasn't with you? She asked. Question lingered, thick and uncomfortable. William stopped walking. The corridor ahead was still and silent, cleared for their passage. He looked at his daughter with something deeper than sympathy, understanding. Some people respect uniforms, he said slowly. Some respect wealth. Some respond to power. He paused. But not everyone sees value in what they don't understand. They blinked, taking in his words. They didn't see a princess, he added gently, saw a child, alone. And in their eyes that meant unimportant. She stayed silent, absorbing the lesson wrapped in his calm. But how they see you, continued, doesn't change who you are. It only reveals who they are. Her fingers tightened slightly around his hand. Next time, he said, kneeling just enough so their eyes met. Speak up. You know who you are. You don't need to wait for others to confirm it. Charlotte nodded, a small but powerful motion, and as they began to walk again, something had changed not just in her, but in the way the world would remember that day. Because the lesson wasn't just about royal protocol, it was about identity, dignity, the quiet strength of knowing your worth, even when the world forgets. Charlotte nodded, but the ache in her chest lingered. They treated me like I was lying, she whispered, like I didn't deserve to be there. William knelt in front of her, bringing himself eye to eye not as a prince, but as a father. Charlotte, he said gently, people see what they want to see. But you did nothing wrong, stood your ground. And that's more than I can say for most grown men. There was a pause. Then, with quiet resolve, he added, but now, it's my turn. They resumed walking. As they approached the main security checkpoint, everything changed. Staff who had barely acknowledged Charlotte earlier now froze at the sight of Prince William. One officer nearly dropped his radio before straightening up. Why, Your Royal Highness, he stammered. We're very sorry about earlier. There was a miscommunication. Was there? William asked, his tone suddenly sharp. The officer opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Charlotte watched in silence. She saw, maybe for the first time, the kind of power her father carried. Not the kind that shouted or demanded, but the kind that simply was, authority wrapped in calm, strength without noise. He turned slightly toward her. Stay close, said. And she did. This time, they passed through security without questions. No stares, no delays. Charlotte watched how everyone moved around her father like gravity pulling toward a star. And for the first time, she understood something. Being seen isn't just about attention. It's about presence. Back in the lounge, William sat down, the weight of the morning finally settling into his posture. Charlotte took a seat beside him, scanning the elegant room filled with soft voices and silver teapots. It was a world apart from that cold, fluorescent-lit waiting room. Still, the sting hadn't faded. It's strange, she murmured. A few minutes ago, they looked at me like I didn't matter. Now they're doing everything they can to please us. William gave a tired smile. That's how the world works sometimes. But remember, there's people like that can't define you. You do. Charlotte looked down, biting her lip. Do you ever wish could just disappear for a while, not be a prince? William was quiet for a moment. Then he answered softly, yes. More times than I can count. But then I remember who's watching. He glanced at her. Not the cameras, the people. People who need strength even when they don't realize it. That's why we keep going. Charlotte stared at him, taking it in. Her heart still hurt. But something new was stirring beneath it now. Not anger, not fear. Resolve. What they took from her this morning, they would never take again. Just then, Stewart entered briskly. Your Highness, the aircraft is ready for boarding. We can escort you now. William stood, straightened his jacket and held out his hand. Charlotte took it without hesitation as they walked toward the gate. Whispers rippled through the terminal. People pointed not at her, but at him. And yet this time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt powerful not because of who stood beside her, but because of what she'd endured and how she'd carried herself through it. Thanks for watching this powerful royal moment. If you were Prince William, how would you have handled the staff's mistake? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on notifications for more royal stories that reveal the human behind the headlines.